Zethkar had killed over 3,000 beings across 47 worlds, and not once had his claws trembled. The Krillian warrior stood 8 feet tall, his obsidian carapace gleaming under the harsh lights of the orbital station. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp talons hung at his sides, each one capable of tearing through steel plating. His species had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most feared hunters, and Zethkar was among their elite. The job posting had appeared on the mercenary networks 3 cycles ago. Standard extermination contract, the kind Zethkar specialized in. A newly discovered species on the Outer Rim had been causing problems for the Galactic Trade Consortium. They called themselves humans, and according to the briefing, they were nothing special. Bipedal mammals with soft skin and no natural weapons to speak of. The contract offered standard rates for what seemed like routine work. Zethkar's ship, the Bone Render, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. His first glimpse of the human homeworld through the viewport showed a blue and green sphere orbiting a yellow star. Nothing remarkable about it. He had seen thousands of similar worlds, most of them now lifeless after his visits. The scanner readings confirmed what the briefing had told him. The humans were technologically primitive, barely capable of interplanetary travel. The warrior's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Other mercenaries would whisper stories about his hunts, how he had single-handedly eliminated the warrior poets of Zerion Prime, beings who could split atoms with their minds, how he had tracked down and killed the last Voidwalker, a creature that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The hegemony of Blades had once hired him to eliminate their own emperor, and Zethkar had done so without hesitation. Fear was an alien concept to him. His species had evolved beyond such primitive emotions millions of years ago. Where other beings felt terror in the face of death, Zethkar felt only cold calculation. Where others experienced doubt, he knew only purpose. His neural pathways had been surgically modified at birth to remove any capacity for hesitation or mercy. He was the perfect weapon, pointed at whatever target his employers designated. The approach to Earth's solar system revealed more about these humans. They had established colonies on several worlds, crude affairs by galactic standards but showing surprising ingenuity given their limitations. Their technology relied heavily on chemical propulsion and primitive fusion reactors. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and simple energy beams, nothing that could threaten a Krillian warrior in full combat armor. Zethkar reviewed the intelligence files as his ship moved deeper into the system. Humans appeared to be social creatures, living in large groups they called cities. They had developed complex languages and showed evidence of artistic expression, though such things meant nothing to a hunter. What mattered was their defensive capabilities, their response patterns, their weaknesses. The files painted a picture of a species barely out of its technological infancy. The first human vessels appeared on his sensors as he passed the orbit of their 4th planet. 3 small patrol craft, armed with what his computer classified as primitive missile systems. They hailed him in broken galactic standard, requesting identification and stating his entry into their territory was unauthorized. Zethkar found their presumption amusing. These soft creatures thought they could challenge him. He opened a communication channel, his voice a harsh rasp that had terrified countless species before. "I am Zethkar of the Krillian hegemony. Your species has been marked for termination. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift." The response surprised him. Instead of panic or attempts at negotiation, the human commander's voice came back steady and calm. "Unknown vessel, you are ordered to leave our space immediately. Any hostile action will be met with force." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Force. These mammals thought their crude weapons could harm him. He had faced beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts, creatures that existed as pure energy, hive minds spanning entire star systems. What could mere humans possibly do to threaten him? The patrol craft moved to intercept his ship, their formation showing surprising coordination for such a primitive species. Zethkar activated his weapon systems, energy cannons that could vaporize most vessels in a single shot. The first patrol craft disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma. The second followed moments later. The third managed to fire its missiles before being destroyed, but they simply splashed harmlessly against his ship's shields. As debris from the human vessels drifted past his viewport, Zethkar felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful hunt beginning. These humans would prove no different from any other species he had eliminated. They would run, They would hide. They would beg for mercy that would never come. And when their world was a smoking ruin, he would collect his payment and move on to the next contract. The warrior's ship continued toward the blue world, passing through increasingly dense defensive positions. Space stations opened fire with beam weapons that barely registered on his shields. Fighter craft swarmed around him like insects, their weapons completely ineffective against his armor. He swatted them aside with casual ease, his advanced targeting systems making short work of anything that approached. Yet something nagged at him as he carved through their defenses. The humans weren't running. Even as their vessels were destroyed around them, more kept coming. Their communications channels carried no pleas for mercy, no offers of surrender. Instead, he heard calm voices coordinating attacks, sharing tactical information, warning other units of his capabilities. They were learning from their losses and adapting their strategies in real time. No matter. Zethkar had seen brave species before. Courage meant nothing when faced with overwhelming superiority. The Karathi had been fearless warriors who fought with weapons forged from solidified starlight. The Nethirim had been living energy beings who could survive in the vacuum of space. All had fallen before his claws. These humans, with their soft flesh and primitive technology, would be no different. His ship entered the planet's atmosphere, the hull glowing cherry red from the friction. Below him spread a world teeming with life, covered in structures that housed billions of these creatures. Soon those cities would be nothing but crater-filled wastelands. Soon the screams would begin, as they always did, and Zethkar would stand victorious over another dead world, his reputation enhanced by yet another successful extermination. The hunt was about to begin. The first city Zethkar chose for his demonstration was called New York. From orbit, it appeared to be one of their larger population centers, with millions of humans packed into towering structures of glass and metal, the perfect target to break their spirit before the real slaughter began. He had learned long ago that psychological warfare was just as effective as physical destruction. His ship descended through the cloud layer, weapon systems primed and ready. Below him, the city's inhabitants were fleeing in all directions, their primitive vehicles clogging the transportation arteries. Zethkar had seen this pattern countless times before. First came the panic, then the desperate evacuation attempts, finally the collapse of all order as civilization crumbled under the weight of inevitable doom. But something was different here. While many humans were indeed fleeing, others were moving in the opposite direction. Emergency responders were rushing toward danger zones, not away from them. Military units were deploying in formation rather than scattering. The communications channels buzzed with coordinated activity rather than screams of panic. These creatures were organizing a defense. Zethkar's first strike vaporized a section of the financial district, turning 3 city blocks into a crater of molten glass. The energy beam carved through the buildings like they were made of paper, sending debris raining down on the surrounding area. He expected this display of power to trigger mass hysteria, but the human response was measured and swift. Emergency services were already mobilizing. Evacuation routes were being cleared, and military assets were converging on his position. The warrior's ship swept low over the cityscape, his weapon systems acquiring new targets. A cluster of government buildings vanished in another burst of plasma fire. A bridge packed with fleeing civilians disappeared in a flash of light. Yet still the humans kept coming. Fighter jets screamed overhead, their missiles exploding harmlessly against his shields. Ground-based artillery fired shells that bounced off his hull like pebbles. Their resistance was futile, of course, but it was strangely persistent. Zethkar had destroyed species that possessed far greater technology, yet few had shown this level of organized determination in the face of certain death. Most civilizations collapsed within hours of his arrival, their leaders surrendering or fleeing to distant colonies. These humans seemed incapable of such rational behavior. A communication channel opened, cutting through the static of battle. A human voice speaking in accented galactic standard. "Alien vessel, this is General Martinez of the United Earth Defense Force. We know what you are. We've studied the reports from other worlds. You're Zethkar, the Krillian hunter." The warrior was momentarily surprised. Few species bothered to research their executioner before he arrived. Most were too busy panicking or praying to their various gods. "Your knowledge changes nothing, General Martinez. Your world will burn like all the others." "Maybe," the human replied, his voice steady despite the destruction raining down around him. But we won't make it easy for you, and we'll make sure the galaxy remembers what happened here. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in amusement. No one will remember you, human. Your species will be footnote in galactic history, like all the others I have eliminated. The conversation was interrupted by an explosion that actually managed to rock his ship. Zethkar's attention snapped to his sensors, trying to identify the source of the impact. His shields had held, but something had managed to deliver enough force to register on his inertial compensators. That should have been impossible with their primitive weapons. The scanner data showed the source, a massive railgun hidden beneath the city's surface, firing projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The weapon was crude by galactic standards, but it was powerful enough to be noticed. More concerning was the fact that they had managed to keep it hidden until the moment they fired. These humans were capable of strategic thinking. Zethkar targeted the railgun's position and fired, but the weapon had already retracted into its underground bunker. Impressive engineering for such a young species. His beam carved a new crater in the city center, but the real target had escaped destruction. The humans were learning to fight him, adapting their tactics to his capabilities. More weapons fired from concealed positions around the city. Particle beam projectors emerged from disguised buildings, fired once then disappeared back into hiding. Missile launchers popped up from sewers and rooftops, emptied their payloads, then vanished before he could target them. None of their weapons could seriously damage his ship, but they were forcing him to work for his victory. The warrior found himself actually concentrating on the battle, rather than simply overwhelming his opponents through superior firepower. The humans had turned their entire city into a weapon, with every building potentially hiding some new surprise. They were using their knowledge of their own terrain against him, something few species had been clever enough to attempt. Still, their efforts were ultimately pointless. Zethkar began a systematic destruction of the urban landscape, reducing entire districts to rubble. His energy weapons carved through their strongest materials like they were made of wood. Their hidden bunkers offered no protection against beams that could melt through solid rock. Slowly but inevitably, the city was being erased from existence, yet the humans refused to surrender. Even as their defenses crumbled around them, they kept fighting. Emergency broadcasts filled the communication channels not with pleas for mercy, but with tactical updates and coordination between surviving units. They were sharing information about his weapon patterns, his ship's vulnerabilities, his movement strategies. They were treating this not as a hopeless last stand, but as a learning experience. That realization gave Zethkar his first moment of genuine confusion in over a century. Why were they bothering to analyze his capabilities when they had no chance of survival? What was the point of tactical intelligence that would die with them? Most species focused their final moments on prayers, panic, or bargaining for their lives. These humans were still trying to fight more effectively. The answer came from an unexpected source. As he paused his bombardment to reassess the tactical situation, every remaining communication array in the city began broadcasting simultaneously. Not surrender terms or final messages to loved ones, but detailed tactical data about his ship, his weapons, his movement patterns. They were transmitting everything they had learned to other human colonies across the galaxy. Zethkar realized with growing amazement that these creatures weren't just fighting for their own lives. They were fighting for their entire species, trying to give their distant kin the information needed to mount a better defense. They had turned their own destruction into a teaching moment for future battles. The concept was so alien to his experience that he actually ceased firing for several seconds, trying to process what he was observing. The pause cost him, while he struggled to understand their strategy. The humans launched their most desperate gambit yet. Every surviving aircraft in the region converged on his position simultaneously, not to attack his ship directly, but to ram it. Dozens of fighters, cargo planes, even civilian aircraft loaded with explosives threw themselves at his hull in a coordinated suicide assault. Individually, the impacts were meaningless. His armor could withstand the explosion of small stars, but the sheer audacity of the attack, the willingness of these soft creatures to trade their lives for even the slightest chance of damaging him, was unlike anything he had encountered in his long career as a hunter. The smoking ruins of New York lay beneath Zethkar's ship as he lifted away from the devastated cityscape. By any measure, the engagement had been a complete victory. The city was gone, its population eliminated, its defenses crushed. Yet something felt wrong. The familiar satisfaction that usually accompanied such destruction was absent, replaced by an uncomfortable sensation he couldn't quite identify. His neural implants should have prevented such confusion. Krillian warriors were designed to feel nothing but cold purpose in the execution of their duties. Emotions were weaknesses that had been surgically removed from their psychology centuries ago. Yet as Zethkar reviewed the battle recordings, he found himself dwelling on moments that should have been meaningless. The human pilot who had saluted before ramming his fighter into the ship's hull. The emergency responder who had continued broadcasting evacuation instructions even as the building collapsed around her. The final transmission from General Martinez wishing luck to defenders on other worlds. The warrior forced himself to focus on practical matters. Intelligence reports indicated that the largest human military installation was located on another continent, in a region they called North America. If he could eliminate their primary command structure, the remaining colonies would likely surrender without further resistance. It was standard procedure, proven effective across dozens of worlds. His ship streaked across the planet's surface at hypersonic speeds, passing over vast oceans and continental landmasses. The planet was remarkably diverse, with climate zones ranging from frozen poles to desert wastelands to lush tropical regions. Most worlds he had visited supported life in only limited areas, but this one seemed to flourish with biological activity everywhere he looked. It was almost a shame to sterilize such a vibrant ecosystem. But the contract was clear: complete extermination. The military facility, which they called the Pentagon due to its five-sided shape, sat in the middle of another urban area. Zethkar's sensors detected massive underground bunker systems, communication arrays, and what appeared to be the planet's primary military command center. Destroying it would decapitate their command structure and likely end any organized resistance. But as he approached the target, something unprecedented happened. Instead of fleeing or mounting desperate defenses, the humans did something no other species had ever attempted. They sent him a formal military challenge. The communication came through official diplomatic channels, bearing the seal of their United Earth government. Zethkar of the Krillian hegemony, by the authority of the United Nations Security Council and in accordance with Galactic Law Section 847.3, we formally challenge you to single combat. Our champion will meet yours in neutral territory. The winner claims victory for their species. Zethkar was so surprised he actually checked his ship's translation systems to make sure he had understood correctly. Galactic law did indeed recognize the right of challenged species to demand single combat in extermination scenarios, but it was an ancient provision that no one had invoked in over 1,000 years. Most species either surrendered immediately or died fighting hopelessly against superior technology. None had ever been foolish enough to challenge a Krillian warrior to personal combat. Your champion would face me. Zethkar's voice carried genuine bewilderment. I have killed beings that could reshape matter with their thoughts. I have destroyed creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. What mortal champion could your species possibly produce? The human response came from a new voice, younger and female. My name is Colonel Sarah Chen, and I will be humanity's champion. I know what you've done to other worlds, Krillian. I know the stories they tell about you, but I also know something you don't. Humans don't give up. We never surrender. And we learn from every fight. The idea was absurd. Zethkar stood 8 feet tall, possessed forearms ending in razor-sharp claws and wore armor that could deflect starship-grade weapons. His reflexes had been enhanced beyond natural limits, his strength augmented to superhuman levels. He had trained in 17 different martial arts from across the galaxy. This human female, even if she were exceptional for her species, would still be a fragile mammal with soft skin and limited natural weapons. Yet galactic law was clear. If challenged to single combat, he was honor-bound to accept. The ancient codes that governed mercenary work were not mere suggestions, but sacred obligations that bound all civilized species. To refuse would mark him as a coward and end his career as effectively as death. Besides, the combat would be brief and decisive, and afterward he could continue with the extermination contract. Very well. Colonel Chen, choose your ground. The location they selected was a flat plain several hundred miles from any population center. Zethkar's ship touched down on one side of the designated combat zone, while a human transport approached from the other direction. As he powered down his vessel's systems and began the ritual preparation for single combat, The warrior found himself curious about this human who was willing to face him alone. His first glimpse of Colonel Chen as she emerged from her transport was almost disappointing. She stood perhaps 6 feet tall, built lean but athletic. Her dark hair was pulled back in a military style, and her expression showed determination rather than fear. But she was still just a human. No natural armor, no claws, no visible cybernetic enhancements. She wore what appeared to be a simple combat suit and carried traditional kinetic weapons. The pre-combat ritual required both combatants to state their credentials and achievements. Zethkar's recitation took nearly 10 minutes. 3,000 confirmed kills across 47 worlds. Victories over beings ranging from energy entities to hive minds to reality warpers. His name was spoken in fearful whispers across half the galaxy. Colonel Chen's response was brief. Sarah Chen, United States Marine Corps, veteran of the Martian colony wars and the Europa uprising. I've never killed anyone like you before, but there's a first time for everything. The casual confidence in her voice was puzzling. Most opponents either showed appropriate terror at this point or engaged in false bravado to mask their fear. This human seemed genuinely unconcerned about facing an opponent who outmatched her in every measurable category. Either she was insane, or she knew something he didn't. The combat zone was a circle 100 meters in diameter, marked by energy barriers that would prevent either combatant from leaving until one was dead. Ancient tradition demanded that both fighters enter armed only with personal weapons and armor, no external support or technological advantages beyond what they could carry. It was meant to be a pure test of skill and determination. Zethkar entered the circle with confidence born of centuries of victory. His forearms moved in practiced patterns, claws extending and retracting as he limbered up for battle. His armor's systems came online, enhancing his already formidable natural abilities. Every sensor, every weapon, every defensive system was operating at peak efficiency. Colonel Chen entered from the opposite side, moving with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence. Her weapons were simple projectile rifles and what appeared to be primitive explosive devices. Against Krillian armor, such weapons would be essentially useless. This would be over in seconds. The energy barrier activated, sealing them both inside the combat zone. Galactic law required a formal beginning to the duel, marked by an ancient phrase spoken in the old tongue. Zethkar's translator converted his words to standard. Let the worthy survive, and the weak perish. Colonel Chen's response was delivered in perfect, unaccented Krillian. Let's dance, you ugly bastard. For the first time in over a century, Zethkar felt something that might have been surprise. The duel began with Zethkar moving faster than most beings could track, his forearms working in perfect coordination as he closed the distance to his opponent. His claws could slice through battleship armor and his speed was enhanced far beyond natural limits. The human should have been dead before she could even raise her weapons. But Colonel Chen wasn't where he expected her to be. She had moved the instant the barrier activated, not backward as most opponents did, but at an angle that put her outside his direct line of attack while still maintaining her own firing solution. Her first shots came from a rifle that should have been completely ineffective against Krillian armor. But Zethkar felt the impacts register on his sensor grid. The projectiles weren't bouncing off harmlessly. They were actually penetrating the outer layer of his protection. Impossible. His armor could withstand plasma cannons and particle beams. Simple kinetic projectiles shouldn't even scratch the surface. Yet his diagnostics were showing actual damage, microscopic but measurable. How had these primitive humans developed ammunition capable of affecting Krillian technology? Chen's voice cut through his confusion as she continued moving, never staying in one position long enough for him to target effectively. Depleted uranium rounds with tungsten cores fired from electromagnetic rails. We may be primitive by your standards, but we've been studying the wreckage from your previous hunts for decades. Amazing what you can learn from battlefield debris. The revelation hit Zethkar like a physical blow. These humans had been analyzing his previous victories, studying the remains of his victims to understand Krillian technology. They had actually developed weapons specifically designed to fight him. No species had ever done such a thing before. Most civilizations barely had time to mount a defense before he eliminated them. His second attack was more cautious, using his superior reach to keep her at a distance while he unleashed a barrage of claw strikes that should have overwhelmed any defense. But Chen moved like liquid lightning, her combat suit enhanced with technology he didn't recognize. She wasn't just avoiding his attacks, she was predicting them, moving to counter positions before he had even completed his strikes. Neural Interface Combat Prediction System, she explained conversationally while emptying another magazine into his torso. We analyzed your fighting patterns from security footage across 12 different worlds. Your species relies heavily on genetic memory and instinctive combat responses, very effective against most opponents but also predictable once you understand the underlying patterns. More impossible knowledge. Security footage from his previous hunts should have been destroyed along with the civilizations that recorded it. How had humans gained access to such data? And how had they used it to develop countermeasures against techniques that had served him for centuries? Zethkar pressed his attack, drawing on combat forms he had learned from species long extinct. But somehow Chen anticipated even these exotic techniques, responding with counters that suggested she had studied more than just his personal fighting style. She was demonstrating knowledge of Krillian martial arts that were supposed to be sacred secrets known only to the warrior caste. The Karathi weren't the only ones who kept records, she said, reading his confusion with unsettling accuracy. Every species you've destroyed left traces, fragments of data that survived in one form or another. Humans are very good at putting pieces together. We've reconstructed combat footage from brain implant memories, communications logs, even quantum echoes in destroyed computer systems. You're not the mysterious force of nature you think you are, Zethkar. You're just another puzzle to be solved. The warrior found himself being driven backward for the first time in living memory, not by superior force or overwhelming firepower, but by intelligence. This human had turned the very thoroughness of his previous hunts against him. Every victory he had achieved, every technique he had used, every pattern he had followed had been cataloged and analyzed by a species that hadn't even existed when he began his career. Chen's weapons fire was becoming more accurate as the fight progressed. She wasn't just aiming randomly anymore, but targeting specific joints and sensor arrays on his armor. Somehow she had identified the weak points in technology that was supposed to be invulnerable to primitive attacks. His mobility was decreasing as actuators failed and power couplings were severed by precisely aimed shots. Your armor is impressive, she admitted while reloading behind cover. She had improvised from the terrain, but it's also complex. Lots of moving parts, lots of systems that need to work together. Take out enough components and even the most advanced technology becomes dead weight. Zethkar's rage finally overcame his tactical discipline. This insignificant mammal was treating him like a mere engineering problem to be solved, rather than the galaxy's most feared predator. He abandoned all pretense of strategy and launched himself at her in a berserker assault that should have overwhelmed any possible defense. Chen was ready for that too. She had positioned herself near what looked like random debris, but was actually a carefully prepared trap. As Zethkar closed in for the killing blow, she triggered a shaped charge that sent fragments of his own ship's armor plating, flying upward at tremendous velocity. The improvised shrapnel tore into his already weakened protection, finally breaching the inner layers and drawing actual blood. For the first time in his life, Zethkar felt physical pain from an enemy's attack. The sensation was so alien that he actually stumbled, his perfect combat rhythm disrupted by this unprecedented experience. And in that moment of vulnerability, Chen struck with weapons he hadn't even known she was carrying. The blades that emerged from her combat suit were unlike anything in his experience. They cut through his remaining armor like it was made of paper, slicing deep into the flesh beneath. But it wasn't just the sharpness that shocked him, it was the material itself. The weapons were forged from some kind of composite that seemed to actively disrupt Krillian biology at a molecular level. Monofilament edges bonded with nanoscale disruptors based on Voidwalker technology, Chen explained as she pressed her advantage. Another gift from your previous victims. Turns out the Voidwalkers had developed some very interesting ideas about how to kill your species before you eliminated them. We just had to figure out how to manufacture it. Zethkar was bleeding from a dozen wounds now, his armor more liability than protection. But worse than the physical damage was the growing realization of what he was facing. This wasn't just one determined human warrior. This was the accumulated vengeance of every species he had ever destroyed, their final knowledge preserved and weaponized by beings who refused to accept defeat. Colonel Chen stood over him as he fell to one knee, her weapons trained on vital points that his failing armor could no longer protect. You want to know the real difference between humans and all those other species you've killed? She asked. They fought for themselves, for their own survival. We fight for everyone. Every extinct civilization, every destroyed world, every voice that was silenced by predators like you. They're all here with me today. The energy barrier around the combat zone flickered and died as Zethkar's life signs approached critical levels. But instead of delivering the killing blow, Chen stepped back and lowered her weapons. I could end you right now, she said. By the laws of single combat, I've won the right to do exactly what you've done to billions of innocent beings. But that's not who we are. Humans don't exterminate entire species, even ones that deserve it. Zethkar looked up at her with something approaching wonder. In his entire existence, no opponent had ever shown him mercy. The concept was as alien as the pain still radiating through his wounded body. Why? He managed to ask through damaged vocal cords. Chen's answer would haunt him for the rest of his days. Because someone has to be better than the monsters. The human medical facility was unlike anything Zethkar had ever experienced. Instead of the sterile efficiency he expected from a military installation, the building buzzed with an energy that felt almost chaotic. Doctors and nurses moved between patients with practiced urgency, but there was something else in their manner, a genuine concern for the beings under their care that extended beyond mere professional duty. Zethkar lay on a specialized bed designed to accommodate his four-armed physiology, surrounded by monitoring equipment that somehow interfaced with his alien biology. The humans had spent considerable effort understanding Krillian anatomy, not for the purpose of killing more efficiently, but to heal the very warrior who had come to destroy them. The irony was not lost on him. Colonel Chen visited daily, though her presence was no longer that of a triumphant victor, but of someone genuinely concerned about his recovery. She would sit in the chair beside his bed and talk about human culture, history, philosophy, topics that should have been irrelevant to a weapon like himself, yet somehow held his attention in ways he couldn't understand. Your species removed emotion surgically, she said during one such visit, but our scientists think the neural pathways might still be there, just suppressed. Dr. Patel believes we might be able to reverse some of the modifications, if you wanted us to try. The idea terrified him in ways that facing death never had. Emotions were weakness, chaos, the very antithesis of everything Krillian culture had built itself upon. Yet as he lay in this strange place, surrounded by beings who had every reason to hate him but instead offered healing, Zethkar found himself curious about what it might feel like to experience the full range of consciousness. Why would you want to help me become more dangerous? He asked. Chen's smile was sad. We don't think emotions make you more dangerous, Zethkar. We think they make you more human, more capable of understanding why what you've done is wrong, and maybe finding a way to make amends. The concept of making amends for his actions was revolutionary. In Krillian society, there was only success or failure, victory or defeat. The idea that past wrongs could be acknowledged and addressed through positive action was completely foreign to his experience. Yet as he observed the humans around him, he began to see how such thinking might work. Dr. Patel, the neurologist assigned to his case, was a descendant of people from a region called India. Her ancestors had survived conquests, famines, and countless other disasters through history, yet she worked tirelessly to heal someone who had come to eliminate her entire species. When Zethkar asked her why, her answer was simple: because healing is what we do. It's who we are. The warrior began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity didn't just fight differently than other species, they thought differently. Where other civilizations focused on survival, humans seemed driven by concepts that transcended mere existence. They spoke of justice, compassion, redemption, and hope, with the same conviction that Krillian spoke of duty and efficiency. His recovery progressed faster than anyone expected. Krillian physiology was remarkably resilient, and the humans had developed treatments that worked with his biology rather than against it. But the physical healing was only part of what was happening to him. For the first time in his existence, Zethkar was experiencing extended contact with beings who weren't afraid of him. The children were the most confusing part of his recovery. Human offspring would sometimes visit the medical facility with their parents, and several had taken to stopping by his room. They showed no fear of his claws or his size, treating him with the casual curiosity they might show any interesting stranger. One small female named Emma had even drawn him a picture, showing him and her standing together under what she called a friendship rainbow. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked her during one visit. Emma's answer was delivered with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "Because Colonel Chen said you're getting better now. And my mom says everyone deserves a chance to be good." The simplicity of that statement hit him harder than any weapon ever had. These beings, who had every reason to teach their children to fear and hate him, were instead teaching them forgiveness and hope. They were raising a generation that believed even monsters could change. As his physical recovery neared completion, Zethkar was faced with decisions that would have been impossible for him to make weeks earlier. The humans had offered him several options. He could be transported off-world to face galactic justice for his crimes. He could remain on Earth under supervision, or he could undergo the experimental procedure to restore his emotional capacity and join their efforts to prevent other extinctions. "I don't understand your motivations," he admitted to Chen during one of their conversations. "You defeated me. By galactic law, you could have executed me, enslaved me, or exiled me. Instead, you offer me choices I never had in my own culture. Why?" Chen was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Because that's what hope looks like, Zethkar. We believe that everyone can change, that even the worst monsters can become something better. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe you'll leave here and go back to killing. But if we don't try, if we don't offer that chance, then we become the very thing we fought against." The warrior found himself struggling with concepts that his modified brain shouldn't have been able to process. The humans were showing him something that went beyond mere tactics or strategy. They were demonstrating a fundamental philosophy about the nature of existence itself. They believed that consciousness was not fixed, that beings could grow and change and become something greater than what they had been. That night, alone in his room, Zethkar made a decision that would have been impossible for the creature that had arrived at Earth weeks earlier. He requested the neural restoration procedure, not because he understood what emotions would feel like, but because he wanted to understand what these remarkable beings had been trying to show him. Dr. Patel performed the surgery herself, using techniques developed from studying the very modifications that had made him a perfect killer. It was, she explained, like restoring a painting that had been partially painted over. The original was still there beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. When Zethkar woke up from the procedure, the first thing he experienced was something completely alien to his existence. Regret. For the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of what he had done across 47 worlds. The weight of 3,000 deaths pressed down on him with crushing force, not as mere statistics but as individual tragedies, each representing a unique consciousness that had been snuffed out by his claws. But along with the regret came something else, something that the humans had tried to explain but he had never understood. The possibility of redemption. If he could feel the pain of what he had done, he could also feel the desire to do something better. For the first time in his existence, Zethkar had a purpose beyond destruction. Colonel Chen was waiting when he emerged from the recovery room, her expression carefully neutral as she watched him struggle with his newly awakened emotional responses. "How does it feel?" she asked. Zethkar looked at her with eyes that now held depths they had never possessed before. "Terrible," he said honestly. "And wonderful. And confusing. Is this what you live with every day?" "The full range of it, yes. The good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow. It's what makes us human." "Then," Zethkar said, his voice carrying new harmonics of emotion, "I would like to learn how to be human too." 3 months after his neural restoration, Zethkar stood before the Galactic Council for the first time as something other than an instrument of death. The massive amphitheater contained representatives from hundreds of species, many of whom had survived his previous hunts or knew someone who hadn't. The tension in the room was palpable as he approached the central speaking platform, flanked by human representatives who had vouched for his transformation. Ambassador Williams, Earth's representative to the Council, had spent weeks preparing for this moment. The legal precedent was unclear. No one had ever attempted to bring a reformed serial killer of Zethkar's magnitude before the galactic community. Some species demanded immediate execution, others called for life imprisonment, and a few suggested studying him as a unique psychological specimen. "Honored representatives," Ambassador Williams began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "We stand before you today not to excuse the crimes of Zethkar of Krylia, but to present evidence that even the most dangerous individuals can be redeemed through proper intervention and genuine remorse." The Karathi delegate rose immediately, his crystalline form resonating with barely contained fury. This creature destroyed the warrior poets of Zerion Prime, beings who had achieved perfect harmony between mind and matter. What redemption could possibly balance such a loss? Zethkar stepped forward, his newly emotional consciousness making him acutely aware of the pain his presence caused. "None," he said simply. "There is no redemption that can bring back the dead or undo the civilizations I destroyed. But there is prevention. There is the possibility of ensuring that others like me never have the chance to cause such harm." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, translation systems struggling to keep up with the dozens of languages being spoken simultaneously. Some delegates demanded to know how he could possibly prevent future atrocities, while others questioned whether any transformation could be genuine after such extensive neural modification. A new voice cut through the chaos, speaking in the ancient diplomatic tongue that predated most modern civilizations. The speaker was a Voidwalker, one of the few survivors of his most devastating hunt, its form flickering between dimensions as emotions played across its reality-warping abilities. "I am Threndi of the Voidwalkers," the being said, its words creating small distortions in space-time. "This creature slaughtered my people, drove us to the edge of extinction. I should demand his death with every quantum of my existence. Yet I have observed the human approach to justice, and I find myself curious." The chamber fell silent. Voidwalkers were known for their absolute nature. They existed in binary states of existence and non-existence, with little room for the nuanced thinking that characterized most species. For one to express curiosity rather than absolute judgment was unprecedented. "Explain your transformation," Threndi commanded, its attention causing reality to ripple around Zethkar. The former assassin took a deep breath, still adjusting to the simple act of respiratory regulation under stress, another reminder of his new emotional capacity. "The humans showed me something I had never encountered. In over a century of existence, the possibility that I could choose to be something other than what I was created to be." He gestured to the viewing screen that had been prepared for this moment, displaying images from his recent months on Earth. "They could have executed me. By every law of war and justice, they had the right. Instead, they offered me medical care, education, and most importantly, the chance to understand the true magnitude of what I had done." The images showed Zethkar working in human schools, his massive form surrounded by children who had no fear of him. Other shots depicted him in construction projects, using his enhanced strength to help rebuild areas damaged during his initial attack. But the most powerful image was a simple one: Zethkar kneeling before a memorial wall, his clawed hands tracing the names of his victims with impossible gentleness. "The humans have a concept they call restorative justice," he continued. "The idea that the goal of punishment should not be vengeance but healing. Not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators as well. They believe that even the most damaged individuals can be repaired, can be made whole enough to contribute positively to society." Delegate Korthak of the Hegemony, a military alliance that had employed Zethkar's services multiple times, rose with obvious anger. Pretty words from a monster trying to escape consequences. "How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception? How do we know you haven't simply learned to mimic emotion to avoid punishment?" It was the question Zethkar had been dreading, because he wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. The line between genuine emotion and sophisticated mimicry was something philosophers had debated for millennia. But as he looked out at the assembled representatives, many of whom showed the scars of his previous actions, he realized that the answer lay not in his own certainty, but in his willingness to be tested. "You don't know," he admitted, "and neither do I completely. Consciousness is not something that can be measured objectively, but I am willing to submit to any test, any evaluation, any form of supervision you deem necessary. I am willing to spend the rest of my existence proving that this change is real." Colonel Chen stood up in the human delegation section. "If I may address the council," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced Zethkar in mortal combat and lived to tell about it. "The question isn't whether his transformation is perfect or complete. The question is whether it's genuine enough to be worth nurturing. She activated her own presentation system, displaying data that made several delegates lean forward with interest. Since his neural restoration, Zethkar has undergone continuous monitoring by our best psychologists and neuroscientists. His brain patterns show genuine emotional responses, not simulated ones. His behavior has been consistent with someone experiencing genuine remorse and attempting to make amends. The data was impressive. Neural scans showing activity in regions associated with empathy and moral reasoning. Behavioral analysis indicating consistent patterns of helpful rather than harmful actions. And psychological evaluations suggesting deep-seated desire for redemption rather than mere self-preservation. But more importantly, Chen continued, he has information that could prevent future tragedies. The network that created and deployed killers like him is still active. The techniques used to suppress emotion and enhance aggression are still being refined and applied to new subjects. Zethkar represents our best chance to understand and disrupt these operations. A hush fell over the chamber as the implications became clear. Zethkar wasn't just seeking personal redemption. He was offering to turn his inside knowledge against the very system that had created him. The intelligence value of such cooperation could potentially save thousands of lives across the galaxy. Threndi spoke again, its form stabilizing slightly as it reached what passed for a decision among its kind. I propose a test. If this transformation is genuine, if this creature has truly learned to value life over death, then let him prove it under conditions where failure means the extinction of those he claims to protect. The Void Walker's proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Zethkar would be given a chance to hunt down and stop other created killers like himself. Working under the supervision of a joint galactic task force, success would demonstrate his genuine conversion. Failure would result in his immediate execution and the deaths of countless innocents. Ambassador Williams looked uncertain. The risk is acceptable, Zethkar interrupted, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was agreeing to. I spent over a century taking lives. If I can spend whatever time remains to me saving them instead, then perhaps some small balance can be restored to the universe. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone expected. Many species still demanded immediate execution, but enough were swayed by the unprecedented nature of the proposal to allow the experiment to proceed. Zethkar would be given his chance to prove that monsters could indeed become heroes. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Threndi approached him one final time. Do not mistake this for forgiveness, killer. My people are extinct because of your actions. But if you can prevent others from suffering the same fate, then perhaps their deaths will have served some purpose after all. Zethkar nodded, understanding that forgiveness was not something he could expect or demand. It was something that might possibly be earned through a lifetime of service to those he had once hunted. The road ahead would be long and filled with dangers both external and internal, but for the first time since his creation, he had chosen his own path. 2 years had passed since the Galactic Council's unprecedented decision, and Zethkar found himself standing on the bridge of the UES Redemption, humanity's most advanced starship and now the flagship of the Joint Species Anti-Extinction Task Force. The irony of the ship's name was not lost on him. He was quite literally seeking redemption among the stars where he had once sown only death. Captain Maria Santos, his human partner and commanding officer, studied the tactical display with the same intensity that had made her one of Earth's most respected military leaders. The target system ahead contained 3 worlds, all showing signs of recent devastating attacks. The pattern was unmistakable to someone who had once created such destruction himself. Another Krillian hunter, Zethkar confirmed, his enhanced senses reading the energy signatures from the devastated planets, but not one operating under standard protocols. The destruction is too random, too emotional. This killer has broken its conditioning. Over the past 2 years, they had tracked down and stopped 7 other created assassins like himself. Each hunt had been different, requiring Zethkar to understand not just the tactical patterns of his targets, but their psychological states. Some had been driven mad by their modifications, others had simply become addicted to killing, and a few had been operating under orders from shadow organizations that profited from galactic instability. Broken conditioning could make it more dangerous, Captain Santos observed, or it could make it vulnerable. What's your assessment? Zethkar appreciated how she always asked for his opinion rather than simply ordering him to track and kill. The humans had kept their promise about treating him as a partner rather than a weapon, and that trust had gradually extended to the other species on the Joint Task Force. Even former enemies now worked alongside him, united by their shared goal of preventing future extinctions. Vulnerable, I believe, he replied after a moment of consideration. A Krillian hunter without conditioning is like a computer without programming, powerful but unfocused. It will be acting on impulse rather than training, which means it can be predicted and countered. The ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the target system, sensors immediately picking up the debris field that had once been a thriving interplanetary civilization. The destruction was massive but chaotic, lacking the clinical efficiency that characterized his own former work. Entire cities had been obliterated unnecessarily, military and civilian targets destroyed without strategic consideration. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Akhtar, the Karathi tactical officer whose own people had suffered under Zethkar's claws years earlier. The working relationship between them had been difficult at first, but mutual respect had gradually developed as they faced common enemies together. "How many died here?" "Billions," Zethkar answered quietly, his enhanced emotional capacity making him feel each death as a personal weight. And all of it pointless. A properly conditioned hunter would have eliminated military assets first, then infrastructure, then population centers. This creature simply killed everything it could reach. The hunt that followed was unlike any they had attempted before. Instead of tracking a calculating predator following logical patterns, they were pursuing something more akin to a natural disaster, destructive, unpredictable, and driven by forces beyond rational understanding. The rogue hunter had left a trail of devastation across multiple star systems, but it had also left clues that revealed its deteriorating mental state. They found it on a mining world in the outer system, surrounded by the wreckage of automated extraction equipment and the bodies of workers who had never had a chance to flee. The creature that had once been Kethmar of the Krillian hegemony was barely recognizable as a member of its species. Its armor had been modified with crude weapons and decorations made from the bones of its victims, and its movements showed the twitchy randomness of someone whose neural pathways had been damaged beyond repair. "Zethkar," it hissed when they confronted it in the facility's main processing center. "The traitor who abandoned the hunt. They said you had been corrupted by the softskins, but I didn't believe it until now." The former assassin stepped forward carefully, aware that his opponent's damaged conditioning made it even more dangerous than a properly functioning hunter. "My name is Zethkar," he confirmed. "And yes, I have been changed by humanity, but not corrupted, healed. The same healing could be offered to you if you surrender." Kethmar's laughter was a harsh sound that sent vibrations through the facility's metal framework. "Healed? You think emotion is healing? You think weakness is strength? I am what we were meant to be, pure killing force without the restraints of morality or mercy." The battle that followed was vicious but brief. Kethmar fought with the desperate fury of someone who had nothing left to lose, but its tactics were wild and unfocused. Zethkar's own combat skills, now guided by strategic thinking and genuine concern for minimizing collateral damage, proved superior to mere berserker rage. When it was over, the rogue hunter lay dying among the machinery it had destroyed. "Why?" Kethmar whispered as its systems failed. "Why did you choose weakness over strength?" Zethkar knelt beside his dying enemy, remembering his own confusion when Colonel Chen had first shown him mercy. "Because I learned the difference between strength and power. Power is the ability to destroy. Strength is the choice not to." The aftermath of each mission had become routine, but it never got easier. Reports had to be filed, evidence cataloged, survivors relocated and provided with support. The task force had developed protocols for dealing with the psychological trauma that followed such massive losses, but Zethkar often wondered if any amount of healing could truly address the scope of what had been lost. Standing in the ship's observation deck as they prepared to return to Earth, he found himself joined by Captain Santos. She often sought him out during these quiet moments, perhaps understanding that someone who had once been a monster needed regular reminders of their humanity. 12 successful missions, she said, reviewing the data pad in her hands. 7 rogue hunters stopped, 3 extinction-level conspiracies disrupted, 2 slave trading operations dismantled. The Council estimates we've saved over 40 billion lives in the past 2 years. And yet, Zethkar replied, watching the stars wheel past the viewport, I killed 3,000 beings in my previous existence. No amount of lives saved can bring back those I destroyed. Captain Santos was quiet for a moment before responding. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point isn't to balance some cosmic ledger, but to ensure that the deaths have meaning. Every life you save now honors the memory of those who died before. It was a very human way of thinking about justice and redemption. But Zethkar had learned to appreciate humanity's unique perspective on such matters. They didn't believe in perfect solutions or absolute redemption, but they did believe in the possibility of growth, change, and meaningful contribution even from the most unlikely sources. There's something else, Captain Santos continued. The Council has approved our proposal for the Academy. The Academy had been Zethkar's idea, a training facility where beings who had been modified for violence could learn to use their abilities for protection rather than destruction. It would be staffed by former enemies who had found redemption, teaching others that there were alternatives to the paths they had been forced to walk. I want you to consider leading it, she said. You understand better than anyone what these individuals are going through, and you've proven that change is possible. Zethkar looked out at the stars, thinking of all the worlds that still harbored beings like he had once been. Weapons in the shape of people. Tools designed for destruction but capable of so much more. It will be dangerous work. Many of them won't want to change. That's why it has to be you. You're living proof that even the worst monsters can become heroes. That even the most damaged souls can be healed. You've confronted monsters without fear, but more importantly, you've learned to confront the monster within yourself. As the ship prepared for its jump to hyperspace, Zethkar made his decision. He had spent over a century taking lives across the galaxy. Now he would spend however much time remained to him, teaching others that there was a better way. It wasn't redemption in any absolute sense. Nothing could truly balance the scales of his past actions. But it was purpose, hope, and the chance to ensure that fewer beings would have to walk the dark path he had once followed. The stars stretched into lines of light as the ship entered hyperspace, carrying them toward Earth and toward a future where former monsters might stand as guardians against the darkness they once served. It wasn't the ending Zethkar had expected when he first arrived to exterminate humanity, but it was the one he had chosen, and in that choice, he had found something he never knew existed, the possibility that even the most broken beings could learn to be whole again. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of hope. And sometimes that was enough.